How do you turn a podcast into a growing YouTube channel? Well, we learned the hard way how not to do it. Don't post your audio to YouTube with some kind of static image to make it technically a video. We tried that for years and to no success. To get your channel to have traction on YouTube, you have to respect YouTube as a platform. You can't just shovel your podcast audio onto YouTube and expect it to do well. I had an interesting conversation about this on the School of Podcasting, hosted by Dave Jackson. Dave is a Hall of Fame podcaster, and we had a discussion about the differences between YouTube and podcasting and how to adapt a podcast to actually do well on YouTube. And most importantly, we talked about what works and what doesn't. While I talk about podcasting about once a year on the Novel Marketing Podcast, Dave Jackson talks about it every week on the School of Podcasting. So I hope you enjoyed this crosscast between the School of Podcasting and the Novel Marketing Podcast, the longest running book marketing podcast in the world.
If you are anywhere near a book, writing a book, thinking about writing a book, you've already written it, got to promote it, anything book related, I have one answer, and that is authormedia.com, the one and only Thomas Umstadt Jr. And it's just fun to say Umstadt Jr. I got to say it. Thank you so much for coming on the show.
Yeah, thank you for having me. I love the School of Podcasting, and I love this chance to come back.
So I love listening to your show because you really pick apart not only this is what's working, but this is why based on these tests. And so when that came through, I was like, oh, well, I'm always open to hear about YouTube and what works and what isn't. And so let's start off. How long have you been doing your podcast?
So I started my first podcast in 2007, which is impressive to some people, but I know not to you. But the current podcast, Novel Marketing, we started back in 2013 as a audio only podcast. And yeah, for years, we recorded on Skype in the early days, trying to do double ender. It's a lot easier now using this Descript room. We'll see how good the recording is. I've never used this particular tech before, so it'll be fun to watch.
Yeah, and what we kind of wanted to walk through is kind of your story as you've moved along and what you've used and what worked and anything that didn't work and those whole 9 yards. So you start off as audio only. When did you start integrating, other aspects of things like that?
Yeah. So about 5 or 6 years ago, there was a lot of buzz about YouTube, and you could take your podcast and put it on YouTube via these various automated tools. And so we experimented with that. There was some service, it's not around anymore, that would do it automatically. It would subscribe to your RSS feed. It would take the MP3. It would put your cover art in a little waveform and make the video file. And I was like, oh, this is a really easy way to have a YouTube show. And we did that for like a year, and it got very little traction because people don't want to listen to YouTube. The experience of listening is so much better in a podcast app than it is on the YouTube app, unless somebody's YouTube Premium, and that wasn't very popular 5 years ago.
But it had a squiggly line.
The squiggly line is cool, but it doesn't hold your attention for 30 minutes. In fact, it's almost worse than nothing, because if there's nothing, it kind of gives me permission to wash the dishes or go for a walk. But there's this concept. I used to do radio for a little bit, and there's this concept in radio between foreground and background listening. So a lot of podcasts, a lot of the two guys talking podcasts are background listening. You're like, how is it that this show that's 4 hours long and 3 days a week has so many listeners? And it's like, well, because people are filling these quiet portions of their day with these friendly voices. Somebody who works on cars might be working on, in fact, our family car mechanic when I was a kid, he would listen to Rush Limbaugh every morning at 11 o'clock, and he would listen to the end of Rush Limbaugh when the next guy came on, and this guy was on it. Like, you thought he was a humble car mechanic, but he could tell you blow by blow what was going on in Washington, D.C. between the Democrats and Republicans. So he listened to talk radio all day long. And that experience that he had listening to talk radio is the same sort of experience for some people listening to podcasts. But other podcasts and a lot of YouTube is foreground listening. It's lean forward listening where you're really paying close attention. You're not really doing something else. And so the formats are really different. And in radio, we're constantly trying to pull people back from being background to being foreground, right? All these little jingles and attention grabbers to get people to start paying attention again so that they'll listen to our advertisers. And so that same sort of thing is happening in terms of the difference between YouTube and podcasting. And it's a lot easier for a podcast to work on YouTube when there's faces. And that's what we started experimenting with about a year ago, because we were already recording in tools like this one that we're using with Descript or Riverside or Squadcast or StreamYard. There's a lot of really good ones. Or Zoom if you're desperate. I don't like Zoom. Its quality is kind of low unless you're really good at setting the settings. Listen to Dave Jackson's advice on how to set your Zoom settings if you're going to do Zoom. But we were recording the video and I was using Descript to edit the episodes. And so I'm like, we might as well put these videos on YouTube. And so it was still really low effort. But just that slight change going from the audiogram to the faces made a huge difference. And we started seeing 2x, 3x the number of views per video. Still small numbers, but it was a lot more than what we were getting with just the audiogram. And it started growing from there.
And so are you adding like lower thirds or anything? Or is this just a single camera shot of you talking into a camera?
At first, it was just side-by-side Descript, really low effort. I was still doing the audio edit, but I was only editing with audio in mind. And then about 6 months ago, we started experimenting with kind of doing this on purpose. I brought on a video editor to start adding some B-roll and to help with the transitions. And Descript's got some really cool features where it can do automatic multicam with its Underlord feature. And so it can go full screen to full screen. But if you want to like switch in side by side and hide edits with a scene change, that's still kind of manual. And that's the sort of thing, if you're editing for audio, you don't worry about. So for an audio edit, you often cut really close to the bone. At least that's how our approach was. We'd cut out every we could get to, because you can cut those ums out and it will sound really natural, but it doesn't look natural. People's faces are jumping all over depending on how many filler words they have. And now we're actually editing slightly differently. We kind of fork the content earlier. And so I have one person who does the audio and a different person who's doing the video. But what really made the difference and what basically 10x'd our views on YouTube was realizing that some things that matter a lot for YouTube don't matter at all for podcasting. It was that discovery of like, oh, these things that aren't very important are actually everything on YouTube. And the two biggest ones are titles and thumbnails. A lot of podcasts just have episode 1, 2, 3, episode 1, 2, 4. You don't recommend that. Yeah. It's not a best practice, but it doesn't really matter. Like if somebody's committed to the School of Podcasting and they're committed to Dave Jackson, they're going to listen to the next episode because they're subscribed. But on YouTube, you have to earn every view because subscribers don't matter.
Yeah, that I've found, because I don't know, I'm over 3,000, which is weird because you feel like it feels like a ton when you're used to talking downloads, and then you see other people's channels and you're like, oh, I'm just a little itty bitty thing. And then when you put out an episode and you've got thousands of subscribers, and after the first day you're like, wow, I had 78 views. You're like, wow, that's depressing. So yeah, don't get too enamored when you see, wow, somebody has 10,000 subscribers. It's like, yeah, let's go look at the view count.
Yeah, there's a trend on all of social media right now called Death of the Subscriber. And it was really spearheaded by TikTok, where the TikTok algorithm doesn't really look at subscribers as a big part of the algorithm. It looks at many, many factors, and subscribers is a tiny piece of it. YouTube puts a little bit more stock in subscribers than TikTok does, but none of them put any kind of weight on subscribers the way Apple Podcasts does, or Spotify, or Overcast. I mean, some of those podcast apps, they give you a little red number to make you stressed out. It's like a to-do list item to listen to this podcast. It's a lot of pressure to keep up with your subscribed episodes, where there's not that pressure on YouTube. And the other thing that's even more important than the title, and this is what we were completely abandoning because it doesn't matter on podcasting at all, is the thumbnail. So I don't know if you create custom thumbnails for your audio episodes. Some more advanced podcasts do that. And it's kind of a nice to have feature, right? Buzzsprout's got a little place to upload. You have your special episode, but like some of the players don't even display it. And it's a complicated, there's half a dozen different standards. Like, are you going to do it the Spotify way or the Apple way or the podcasting 2.0 way for the individual episode artwork? And nobody's really using that art to make their decision about whether to listen to an episode or not. But they are on YouTube. So the YouTube experience, you've got this wall of episodes that you're scrolling past on your phone or on your computer, and you're primarily seeing the thumbnails for those episodes. And it was when we started actually custom designing thumbnail images and putting text on the thumbnails, because we were taking previously our blog post images. So we take the transcript from every episode and we turn it into a blog post, because we have a big chunk of our audience that just reads the blog versions of the episodes. And so we would have a blog image, like a stock photo, and we were just using that as a thumbnail, and that was garbage. It did not work. But once we started actually making thumbnails following actual best practices and learning what those best practices are, which is text, faces, arrows, things like that, it started making a huge difference in terms of our downloads. In fact, the first few videos I did with text, we were getting like, a few hundred views. The next one's got thousands of views. It was just like a massive jump overnight. And that was what I was realizing. I was like, okay, this is a different platform. It needs to be respected differently, and the rules are different, and titles and thumbnails are everything.
Now, do I always have to make some sort of goofy face? Because it always seems like everyone's either surprised or super sad. It's very extreme in the facial expressions. That seems to be something that just everybody's doing.
It helps. Big eyes help. So strong emotions really matter. Another big difference that we learned, and this was where I had to start changing the show, was the opening really matters. So when somebody taps a video, they're not committed to listening to the whole thing, which again is very different from podcasting. Once somebody starts listening to a podcast episode, they're committed. In fact, for me, listening to podcasts, I have playlists in Overcast. And so when I go to my news playlist in the morning and I start listening to the first episode, I'm often not just committed to that first episode, but all of the news, because I have a lot of short news shows that I listen to, bang, 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 right after each other. And I listen to them straight through. That's not how YouTube is. So people listen to the first 30 seconds of YouTube very much on an experimental basis. And I don't think YouTube even counts the view until they stuck around for 30 seconds. I forget exactly where the threshold is, but I think they have to be watching for at least 30 seconds for the view to count. And so a lot of podcasts open really slow. I have some podcasts I listen to where I just skip the first 5 minutes in Overcast automatically because they never say anything interesting in the first 5 minutes. Not your show, by the way. You do a good job opening strong. But even like best practices in podcast world, you're not providing value in the first 30 seconds. And I wasn't. I would often open with this like 2 or 3 minute intro story that kind of provided context and got people interested in the topic, which worked really well for a podcast, did not work well on YouTube. I was listening to a Mr. Beast interview. He's the #1 YouTuber right now. And he was talking about how you have to start delivering on the promise that you make with your thumbnail within the first 30 seconds. And I was like, whoa, like delivering on the promise. So he'll have like a video where there's like, I did 7 dangerous things. And it's like, and we're going to do the first dangerous thing right now. And you're 10 seconds into the video and he's in the water and there's sharks swimming around him. And within 30 seconds, he's survived the shark attack, right? Like the need to open strong on YouTube is so high. And it's just really was a big adjustment for me coming from podcast world.
I always think it's odd because in theory, there's more discovery on YouTube. So new people are finding you, and yet you don't give them anything about street cred. It's not like, hi, I'm Thomas. I'm the longest running book, except no, none of that. It's just like right to the point. And we're in podcasting where people have heard my intro over and over and over. No, I'm still telling them podcasting since 2000. I'm like, okay. So I think that's backwards. But on the other hand, the nice thing about YouTube is there's tons of stats, like just insane amounts. And you can see what's working and what's not. So yeah, I've noticed a lot of people barely say their name. Usually they just put a little lower third that says who they are and what their website is as they're getting into, the topic. So
and another technique is you can add the show intro, but you add it in later on in the episode. So you're kind of front loading. So there's this in podcasting world, it's all about getting the subscriber. It's all about getting somebody committed to the show. And so you introduce them to the show overall. It's like, hey, this is the School of Podcasting, and we talk about all things podcasting. And today we're going to be talking about adapting your podcast for YouTube. And so you sell the big show and then you sell the individual topic. On YouTube, it's inverted. You sell them on the individual. So today we're talking about adapting your podcast for YouTube. And then later on, you're like, and this is the School of Podcasting. It's everything podcasting. And it seems like a really minor change. But again, you're having to sell that individual episode, and somebody might listen to one episode and then the algorithm feeds them another episode a few weeks later. And they might have listened to 3, 4, or 5 of your episodes before they ever click subscribe or like or ring the bell for notifications, which all of you should do on Dave's channel, by the way.
Well, so you gave us some tips on thumbnails. How do you come up with good titles?
So we use AI for this. We've been experimenting with different AIs for brainstorming. Often what we'll do is we'll have Grok or GPT or Anthropic's Claude generate dozens and dozens of titles. So we'll feed it the goal of the episode, the topic of the episode. If I have an outline, sometimes I'll feed it the outline of the episode. The goal is to get just lots and lots of ideas. Not that we're going to use any of the ones that AI gives us. Sometimes it'll give us a good one, but it's more of getting it to get us out of the rut. Because my initial episode idea is always garbage. It will often just be the topic and it's no good. And I'm starting to learn sometimes I can't do the episode until I have a good title for it. So there's an episode I've been wanting to do for about a year. And my internal title for this episode is Statistics for Authors, where I explain the Pareto distribution, the 80-20 principle, and the standard distribution, and why, if you don't understand this, you're going to lose money as an author. And that will not work on YouTube. Statistics for Authors is maybe the worst possible episode title. I mean, there's some people, there's the loyal listeners who watch every episode. They'll hang with me through my intro about why it's so important. But I finally have come up with a better framing device for this topic that'll get people angry, that will then cause them to listen to a whole episode about statistics. So it's not that I have to change the content necessarily. I have to change how it's presented up front, and I've got to add that sizzle, because one of the things I've learned, anything with controversy, anything with politics does really well. Like the episodes I was sure were going to get me canceled would get thousands and thousands of more views. Not a little bit more views, but like way more views. And not even just political in terms of Democrats and Republicans, but like political where you're taking any kind of controversial stance. You're challenging the prevailing wisdom. One of my most popular episodes of all time is about why authors shouldn't write books in a series, which everybody gives the opposite advice. And that episode actually has a really good intro. It's like, you shouldn't write your book in a series, and I can prove it using math. That's like the first 10 seconds. And I jump straight into the math. So we're like going through mathematical formulas. And by the end of the first 30 seconds, I've made my first argument in what's probably 7 or 8 arguments for this point.
Interesting. It's just a completely different platform. You know what I mean? Different platform, different rules. So that's the part where, like the show I do on Saturday has never been super serious. It's me offering free podcasting advice. And it still bothers me that I hit done. And aside from occasionally going in and trimming out a few seconds at the beginning because I messed something up, it is unedited. And I'm like, oh, that's just because I then edit the audio and there's all sorts of edits in it. And I'm like, but because YouTube doesn't let me replace the video and I've already got 50 views on it, I'm like, well, I don't want to ruin that video. So it's just a different ballgame.
YouTube does have an editor now where you can trim pieces of your video and cut them out without resetting your views. But so everything we've been talking about is about me adapting novel marketing for the YouTube channel. Just in the last couple of months, we've launched a new show called Author Update, where we record it live on YouTube. And often this live show that's unedited, just like what you're describing, beats the evergreen episode from novel marketing. In fact, right now, our top 5 most viewed videos for the last month, I think 4 of them are author update episodes. And this is a totally different kind of show. It's so novel marketing. The goal is for very evergreen episodes. People go back and re-listen to episodes from years before that teach them
Right. That you've been
principle.
doing for 12 years,
Right. I'll occasionally go and re-record and revisit a
Yeah.
topic and update it. But people go back and binge like they do with your show. And the downside of that is that because the goal is evergreen, I don't cover a lot of breaking news, and I have to feel like this news story is like make the yearbook and for the encyclopedia level news, right? It's like this is big summary of what's going on in the world for this year, and it meant that people weren't getting my perspective on the news, and turns out there's a real dearth of publishing news. There's not a lot of people covering it. It's kind of hard to gather like news for authors, and so I think that's part of the reason why this new show is doing so well, is that there's not nearly as much competition, whereas giving writing advice and marketing advice is a much more saturated market.
Yeah, that's got to be weird though, to have the show that you've been working on and honing for years, and then this new thing comes along. How long have you been doing that now?
We've been doing
Couple
it
months?
since, about 2 months, and it's only
Yeah.
doing better on YouTube. So we did
Okay.
turn it into a podcast. We take the audio from it, and I created a new podcast with Buzzsprout, and I don't put nearly as much effort, right? I'm not dealing with ID3 tags. I'm not dealing with compression. I'm just trusting Buzzsprout to take the MP3 that I get from Riverside and turn it into a podcast. And that's done surprisingly well, actually. But it's not doing nearly as well as novel marketing. So novel marketing still has a core base of listeners. And this was the other interesting thing. The YouTube audience is basically entirely new. There's very little overlap. There's very few people who are trying to decide if they want to watch the video version or listen to the podcast version. There's a lot of folks like my mom. She has in her heart room for about 4 or 5 apps. And YouTube is one of those apps, and the podcast apps are not those apps, despite the fact that her son is a professional podcaster whose podcast she likes, and her other son is a professional podcast editor. Like, my mom would like to listen to podcasts, but she just doesn't have room in her life for
Right.
apps. But now that I'm on YouTube, she watches every episode.
Well, that's got to be, it's nice to finally get, mom watching, but
It only took 13
can-
years.
but now mom can also see how many viewers you have, which you can't see in the audio world. Did that take a little getting used to?
That was the biggest reason I didn't start doing YouTube sooner, was the transparent popularity was very scary, because when you start on a new platform, you start at 0. Now, I had an unfair advantage in that we have 12,000 plus
Right.
people on our email newsletter. And so I was able to, when we do a new episode, I'd be able to email out to all of our subscribers, hey, there's a new episode. And that really juices the algorithm. So we weren't really starting from scratch, but still we were starting from scratch as far as the YouTube algorithm was concerned. And the YouTube algorithm doesn't really start feeding you new subscribers until you get to the monetization threshold. So once you can be monetized, which I think you need 4,000 watch hours and 1,000 subscribers. Once YouTube starts putting ads on your content, YouTube is much more motivated to
Shocking.
bring you new audience. I think they put ads on your content before that, but they don't share the money with you.
Right.
I'm not sure how that works, but and part of it is also, by the time you've learned how to grow to 1,000 subscribers and learned how to get 4,000 watch hours, you've gotten better at YouTube, because it's its own language. It has its own rules of what works and what doesn't work, and its own like way of opening, things we've talked about. All of that stuff took practice to kind of figure it out. And most of those changes didn't need to be edited again for the podcast. Like the podcast people, nobody's complained that I'm starting episodes faster now. People are like, no, I want you to go back to the more context, slower open. And,
Please don't get to the content any quicker. Yeah. Well, have you done the thing where in the audio podcast you'll see here up in the right-hand corner? Because that's the only time when I kind of go, oh, I'm listening to a video.
Yeah. So I don't do a lot of that, but I have done a few videos that are like that. But we've always had a blog version companion for our show for years and years. And so my listeners are used to going to the blog version to see whatever it is that we're talking about, because we've covered visual topics before. We got one negative comment that I thought was one of our most well-deserved comments. I did a whole episode on book covers. This was back when we were an audio-only podcast. And then we faithfully converted that episode about book covers into a blog post. But at no point did we add any book covers to the blog post. So this is 2,500 words, 3,000 words, where I'm interviewing one of the top cover designers about what makes for a good cover. But at no point is there an actual cover where like, look, here's an example of what we're talking about. If you go to that post now, it has covers, but it's like, okay, that's fair. We need to, for the blog version, we need to give people something to look at.
The other thing you mentioned is you emailed out when a new, video hits. Is that something that just barely nudges the needle, or is that something, obviously you're still doing it, so it must be worth it a little bit, but how much of a difference does it make to, email those people?
Yes, this was another big adjustment from Podcast World. In Podcast World, when an episode goes live doesn't really matter. In fact, I like to have my episodes all go live at 2 a.m. because my thought is if I post at 2 a.m, Apple Podcasts and Spotify and all the various RSS catchers will have updated. And so when people are downloading new episodes on their way to work, our episode will always be there because there's been plenty of time for the feeds to refresh. And I realize nowadays with Podping and AI, it's less of an issue, but we go back a long time where sometimes you post a new episode and it wouldn't appear on Apple for, hours and hours and hours. So that's just how we do it. And that's how we still do it. So on Wednesday morning at 2 a.m., the new novel marketing episode posts. The video does not post at 2 a.m. because the most important hour for YouTube determining whether to make a video go viral or not is the first hour after the video is posted. So if I post a new video while all of my core audience in the United States are asleep, YouTube will determine this video is not very popular. And there are tools, and I pay for one called TubeBuddy, which I think if you're going to do YouTube, paying for TubeBuddy for 1 year is a good idea because it will email you every time you post a video and harass you about all these things I've been talking about. And give you like, you need to do this better. You need to do this better. And I found it really annoying, but I was like, all right, I started doing more and more of those things. And I was like, dadgummit, these things really do matter.
Yeah.
And it will give you a chart. It will look at your stats and say the very best time for you to post in the day on a Tuesday is at 2 p.m. and on a Wednesday it's 3 p.m. And if you're going to do live, then here's the date, because YouTube collects just an overwhelming amount of data, and TubeBuddy does a good job analyzing that. And so TubeBuddy told me that on Wednesdays the best time to publish is noon. Well, pretty much every podcast that I personally follow posts at noon. So we do ours at 11 a.m. So we're not perfectly following TubeBuddy's advice, but 11 a.m. is pretty close to noon. And so it's 11 a.m. when the new YouTube video posts. And I try to send that week's email as close to 11 a.m. as I can. It doesn't always happen because that one piece of it is manual and that one piece of it is me. It's not my team. And so I'm the biggest point of failure in the system, which I fully acknowledge. But when I do send the email as closer to 11 a.m., I find that the video does dramatically better on the organic new visitors that YouTube brings in. So the more people that I bring in from my newsletter during that first hour, it's like every person I bring in, YouTube will double or triple that of new users it introduces my show to.
That's interesting because I know in the past I've definitely put out videos at like 1:30 in the morning because I'm going to bed and I just want this to be out when I could have easily scheduled it for a much better time, because 11 noon, that makes sense. People are going to lunch and, they're going to grab their phone and go, okay, what I missed while I was doing my job, and they're going to go right to YouTube. So that makes sense. You mentioned getting monetized with the so many hours and that whole 9 yards. Do you remember, like, how long did it take you before that finally took off? I know you've only been doing it a couple months.
Yeah, so we launched the YouTube channel technically with those audiograms years ago.
Oh, there
so
you go.
It was the same YouTube channel. But here's the deal. Those audiograms didn't do any good. The only one that got any traffic was an episode we had on Goodreads, which is still one of our best performing episodes. Partly because just nobody's talking about Goodreads, and we had a really good episode on Goodreads, and so YouTube smiled upon this otherwise not very good episode. But it was basically one video. So this is the thing about YouTube. One video can monetize you. It's not, so it's another big shift. Podcasting is about faithfulness, providing consistent value every single week. And really, it's about not having any bad episodes. because if you have 2 or 3 bad episodes in a row, people start unsubscribing because there's that
Yep.
big pressure from the inbox style apps to listen to every new episode. And if people just aren't finishing your episode, they start to feel guilty. It becomes easier to just unsubscribe than to mark them all as completed. And so for success in podcasting, it's more about avoiding the bad episodes. Whereas if you have a bad episode on YouTube, YouTube will just not show it to anybody, and they'll never know you had this bad episode. It's like they have to dig for it. Because almost all of the lists of episodes on YouTube are algorithmically generated. Whereas on YouTube, if you can have one viral episode, that makes all the difference in the world. And so we did an episode called How to Write Novels That Men Want to Read. And it was about the differences between men and women, which I don't know how it was when you were growing up, but that was not controversial when I was growing up, that men and women are different, like psychologically and spiritually, and they have different tastes and they like different movies. But wow, this was controversial. We were taking a bold statement with this episode, and we were advocating for fiction specifically written for men, because there's this big buzz on X about why are men not reading books? Men used to read books, now they're not reading books. And I had a guest on who made a really strong case that the publishing establishment is mostly run by women now. Most of the editors are women. Most of the people on the pub boards are women. And they're making editorial decisions that are geared around female preferences instead of male preferences. So, for example, info dumps, which men tend to like. One of the biggest reasons men read fiction is to learn something. Women don't like info dumps. And that's been the prevailing information. Don't do an info dump in your book. Readers don't like it. When in reality, female readers don't like it. You know, when Tom Clancy had 30 pages about how to build a nuclear bomb in the middle of Clear and Present Danger, the dudes reading that were more excited about the 30 pages on how to make the nuclear bomb than they were about, you know, all the adventure story trying to keep the bomb from blowing up. Right? And very different preferences. And we broke down a lot of different things. But that episode continues to be one of our best performing episodes. And it brought in hundreds of new subscribers and brought in thousands of views, because it was a long episode. It was, 50 minutes long, something like that. And so when you have a longer episode, it doesn't take nearly as many viewers who watch through to the end of it to get your watch hours. And that's one of the misnomers that I had to unlearn about YouTube. Because when I started on YouTube, my first YouTube video was in 2005. It was all about short, right? You couldn't upload more than 10 minutes to YouTube. It was a hard limit. It's like, that's not how YouTube is anymore. The algorithm now favors long watch time. So YouTube actually likes longer videos than shorter videos. In fact, it's really hard to find a 5-minute YouTube video anymore, because those just don't give YouTube the kind of watch time that a 15 or 20-minute video gives.
Yeah, now somebody who had a 5-minute video will cut it down and just make it a short.
Right.
So they can do it on their phone or whatever. Well, now that you've been monetized, are you going to retire now? Because I know that sweet YouTube money comes in. When I don't know, I don't want to get in your wallet. And if you don't want to say, that's fine. But I mean, when I looked at my numbers, I think one month I was making basically $5. And is it in that ballpark-ish?
No, we're making closer to between $200 and $400. Again, it depends on if we've had a viral hit that month. So one popular video can bring in a lot more. And the topic seems to also have an impact. So our episodes about AI, they tend to perform a little bit better. Like, it's a popular topic and people are really curious about AI, and a lot of people in author world aren't really talking about it. But the advertisers for AI are paying more. So from what I can tell, so writing is not a super monetized topic. It's, if I had a business podcast, I'd be making a lot more per view. But AI is a really highly monetized topic. And so an episode on AI will actually pay better than an episode on, how to write by the seat of your pants as opposed to how to write from an outline. So that kind of topic doesn't monetize as well. But yeah, the bigger hits will bring in more money. But that said, we're currently spending more than that on editing, because I staffed up to do the YouTube show for real. So, I have somebody on my team who works freelance who's helping with editing and putting in B-roll, which I'm not convinced helps. I'm actually not. We're on the fence on B-roll. We don't do it for interview episodes very much anymore, and we're kind of going back and forth on the solo episodes. But he also helps with thumbnails and with headings, so as we hit to new, there's a lot of labor that goes into a good YouTube video. The additional costs and my additional time of like, because I now have to spend more time in Descript for the video, and the costs related to author update, we're still losing money. So it's not like directly anyway. We have had an increase in patrons. I cannot find a good way to tease out, I guess, other than surveying my patrons, if they're listeners or watchers, because I do know just anecdotally interacting with patrons that a lot of them are now talking about watching the podcast. I've been watching your podcast recently, or I've recently discovered you, and almost all of the recent discoveries are YouTube folks who just find out. In fact, my conference, the Novel Marketing Conference, which was in January, we had somebody come to the conference who found us through the YouTube channel, and we'd only started like YouTubing for real for only a few months. So it was mostly still, our email list and our blog, but there was already folks from the YouTube community showing up, flying across the country to show up in person to our conference.
So when you started, was your goal, because I hear a lot of people like, oh, I'm going to grow my audio audience by starting a video. And it doesn't sound like you were like, no, I'm going to start. It's like playing on a separate stage at, I don't know, Coachella. It's like, no, I'm going to grow an audience over here. I'm not going to try to get people to leave the main stage wherever they are and come over here. I'm just going to build a new audience over here. Was that pretty much the strategy?
Yeah, it was an audience growth strategy. And it was also reaching a different kind of person. So the listeners on my audio podcast and the blog are older and they're more female. So my kind of core podcast listener is a woman in her like between 50 and 55. The core YouTube watch person is a dude in his 30s. And so it's not just a new audience, it's like a new audience. It's like a completely different demographic. So if you spend any time in writing world, the typical writing world is women in their 50s. That's like the core. Like if you go to a writer's conference, that's the center of the bell curve. And that's not what we're reaching on YouTube. In fact, for a while, our YouTube audience was like 80% guys, which I probably why Men Write episode did so well. Because for that audience, the like red pill bros on YouTube audience, that kind of topic is red meat for them. They really like that sort of topic. Whereas a lot of the women were very offended. They're like, I like this kind of fiction too. It was like, that's fine. We're not saying that you can't like these kinds of stories.
Right.
Anyway, I'm not going to get into the details of that episode. There's lots of drama, hundreds of comments. I find that the best performing videos don't have more than about 92% like rate. You need people clicking dislike for a video to really do well on YouTube.
That's interesting. Wow. And then the other thing I want to ask about was time, because it's like, oh, it's just, throw on some lights and look in a camera. Like, how has this changed the amount of time it takes? Because how many kids do you have now?
We have 4 children, 6 and younger. So we're quite busy on the children regards.
Yeah. So that's, time is, that's expensive, when you got 4 kids to handle.
So that was a concern early on. And the biggest issue of time was the learning curve, because everything we've been talking about in terms of learning curve is unique to the YouTube platform specifically. What we haven't talked about is how to get the lighting right, how to get the video right, how to get the backdrop right. Like there's this whole language of video that's in addition to the language of audio, right? Like you're spending all this time with audio. How do you get, the background noise reduced? I will say bookshelves full of books do 2 things. 1, it makes for a good backdrop. 2, books are shockingly sound dampening and sound blocking. 2 things you want for a sound treated room. A bookshelf will do both of those things if it's full of books. It's just the opposite if it's empty of books. Then it becomes a speaker box and it can do weird things to the echo. So these books behind me, for those of you watching the video version, are sound treatment, but they're also video treatment for the room. And so that's a big learning curve. And I will save you from 90% of the difficult lessons I had to learn with 2 recommendations. I wish these products either existed or if somebody had told me this, because I spent an entire month trying to get a teleprompter to work and I just couldn't get it to work in any sort of reproducible way. The Elgato prompter. Just buy that. Don't look at any of the others. The Elgato prompter is magic, and it fixes the eyesight issue. Because one of the problems with our earlier videos, we'd be recording in video, but my eyes would be on my screen, rather than on the camera that was above the screen. And I wasn't looking right at the viewer. And that's disorienting. People are used to the person on camera looking straight into the camera. And so having a prompter, and the reason why the Elgato prompter is so magical is because it can reverse any screen on your computer. So you can just put up a Zoom window or a Descript window and still be able to read all the text. Any teleprompter can do a script, but that's not what we do as podcasters. Often it's interviews and a script. Dave, I blew up his script probably 20 seconds into this interview, right? You just got to roll with it. And so the scripting doesn't work. And so having the Elgato prompter, it's less than $200. Great purchase. The other purchase that changed everything was just using my iPhone, or my old iPhone in this case, as my camera. So if you're on a Mac, Macs have this amazing feature called continuity cam, where an old iPhone, if it's not too old, can become the webcam. And your old iPhone performs better. My iPhone, my old one, performs better than my $800 mirrorless Sony DSLR camera. It's shockingly, and it's way less hassle because it does all of this magic in its image engine. Your modern phone is mostly camera, actually, and using an actual phone for a camera makes a huge, huge difference. And so I don't have to worry about lighting. I actually keep my lights off most of the time. I mean, I have lots of light sources, so I don't have any harsh shadows, but I have big Elgato key lights. They're off right now. I could have a window behind me. It would expose just fine. Like a lot of the rules of making lighting work for video, you don't have to follow if you're using a phone because the phone has AI that knows that people taking iPhone pictures are terrible at taking pictures. So it just fixes it automatically. So those two things make the video quality piece of it a lot easier. Instead of giving your old iPhone to your kids, don't give them a phone. Let them enjoy their childhood for a little bit longer. Take your old iPhone and insert it permanently into your Elgato prompter. And that will help solve the video piece of it. But to answer your question, it is absolutely more work. It's becoming worth it. And it's really nice to reach these new people and to have all the energy and excitement of a new group of folks in the community. But it is absolutely more work. And also it changes like when and where I can record. So this is a trick I learned from you. You've got this really cool task cam that you'll just connect to an old XLR mic, and you can go to a conference and just record really quick interviews and get good audio. To do that with video is doable, but it's way more complicated. It's more gear. So there's just a lot of complexity pieces that get added. And the third thing I would say is something like what we're recording right now, something that's double-ended recording. If you do those three things, use your phone, Elgato prompter, and double-ending recording, the video quality piece will be pretty good if you're already following Dave Jackson's advice on audio quality.
Well, and if you're doing things out in the field, the Hollyland, they're unbelievably tiny little microphones that clip on to your, collar or whatever, and they go directly into your phone. So done deal. If that's, I've yet to do that myself, but I've seen many videos and bought the microphone. I've just got to configure everything now, but that's, it's a lot of work and a lot of fun, but, it sounds like you're starting to get, you're losing money, but it sounds like things are moving in the right direction.
We're making progress. The show is getting bigger. The episodes are getting bigger. And y'all miss out, but when David and I are done recording one of these episodes, we tend to talk about gear for quite a long time. We both buy gear just to test it, which is a very expensive hobby, by the way. You have no idea the amount of money Dave spends to keep this show recommendations interesting. But yeah, I'm really glad I'm doing the YouTube channel. I do think that the new patrons are covering it, but I don't have hard data on that. But it is nice to have another revenue source, because YouTube just straight up gives me money in addition to the patrons.
And I think that's because Patreon, even though podcasters have been using it, I think YouTubers mention it more.
Well, it started off as it was created by a YouTuber. Patreon was founded by a famous YouTuber, music couple.
I always say when you go to YouTube and you mention, getting comments and stuff on different episodes, is I always say, be careful when you go to YouTube because they're not afraid to let you know when they think you stink. So is that something that it took a little getting used to, or because it just seems like they're much more vocal?
Yes. And this is a big adjustment because if you're from podcast world, remember a bad podcast episode causes somebody to stop listening and then you've lost a subscriber. And so negative feedback you really have to take that really seriously because you want to keep your subscribers happy. It's just the opposite on YouTube. If somebody leaves a really scathing negative comment on your video, that boosts the video in the algorithm. And so it actually helps you. And so
Yeah.
you're basically harvesting attention from the trolls. And I know YouTubers who will purposefully like be demonstrating something and they'll do the math wrong. They'll say, you know, as you know, 6 plus 7 is 18 and doing the math. And just to trigger all the people going in the comments to correct their basic mistake. Because making basic mistakes that trigger and get people angry in the comments or make them feel self-righteous by correcting you or intelligent actually there's a technique for it called engagement farming. So, which is a big mindset shift. It's like, oh yay, I'm getting some negative comments. Because when you get negative comments, other people will then respond to those comments being like, nah. And if you can get two trolls fighting each other in your comment section, that draws in a lot more audience. And so it's a very big adjustment. So comments are good. Negative comments are good. The only time I'll delete a comment is if it has bad language. So I have strict filtering. You can set different levels in YouTube. I have strict filtering, but sometimes people know how to get around the filter. So if somebody's alluding to bad language, I'll still nuke the comment to try to keep it family friendly. But I've had people say really nasty things about me, attacking my appearance and attacking my religion, but nothing's off bounds. And I just have to remind myself, this feeds the algorithm. They're bringing in more people to this YouTube video. And nobody reads the comments to help them determine whether or not to watch a video. And YouTube tends to surface the positive comments at the top. And you can like comments that also cause those comments to float to the top. And so I'll like positive comments about a video, not the ones that are insulting the way I look.
That's got to be a fun thing to see. The first thing you get down, you sit down at your desk first thing in the morning and they're like, you look like a troll. And you're like, thank you. Thanks,
This
Mom.
man's face scares me. I'm like, sorry, it's the only face I have.
What about, I know, because I listen to your show, we both talk about how important an email list is. How does that work on YouTube? Because I know the one thing that YouTube really wants you to do is get that person that's watching the current video to watch the next video. So how does that work because if you send every video with like, hey, go over there and fill out this form and be on my email list, I could see where YouTube might go, yeah, that's enough of that. Stop it.
Actually, YouTube is pretty good about allowing you to put hyperlinks in the description. And this is one nice thing about YouTube compared to podcasting. So podcasting, you can add links, but how people interact with those links, it's very different depending on how they're listening to your podcast. So are they on Amazon podcast app or Amazon Music app? Are they on Spotify? Are they on Apple? Are they on Overcast? Each one of these platforms will handle the description and links differently. So it's hard to say, check the link in the description below to become a patron. And I think this is actually one of the reasons why Patreon does really well on YouTube, because you have this description field. You can put a link to Patreon and people just tap it with their finger, click it with their mouse, takes them straight to Patreon. Whereas there's a funding tag in the Podcasting 2.0 features and like 2 apps support it.
Yeah.
Realize I'm preaching to the choir here because you're all in on Podcasting 2.0, but I'm like, come on, y'all, support the funding tag. It's not hard. It doesn't have to go to Patreon. You can put that link going anywhere you want. Overcast supports it, which is good, but more people need to listen to the Podcasting 2.0 podcast and start incorporating those features into their apps. YouTube, though, is really good about allowing you to have links. So we'll always have a link to the blog version. We'll typically remember to have a link to Patreon. I found that kind of a please join my newsletter pitch doesn't work particularly well. What works better is we have the special guide companion for this episode. Then you can go find the specific guide for this specific episode at this specific place, which is typically the blog version. That kind of pitch works better. And I wish I could say, hey, I have a special guide on doing YouTube from your podcast and you could download it at authormedia.com, but I didn't create that guide. I'm sorry, Dave.
It was going to be one of my questions. I was going to be like, hey, before we wrap up, am I sending them any place? The other thing that I want to ask you about is you had mentioned something about January and the fact that apparently in January, because you had decided, hey, new year, I'm going to jump into this YouTube thing.
Yes, that was fortuitous. I had heard this somewhere. We started taking video seriously. We started getting into it in December. That's when our first, some of our first viral videos started hitting. I think the Writing for Men was a little bit before that, but January we were like, okay, we're going to hit the ground running. And I did not appreciate just how big the dearth of new YouTube content is in January. It's like the perfect time to start a new show because all of the monetized shows basically take January off because the amount of money in the advertising bucket falls off a cliff. So advertisers spend in December, ramping up for the Christmas retail season. And then it's the new year and everyone's in recovery. Like if you go to a department store in January, like half the shelves are empty. Like retail world takes just January off effectively. And YouTubers, many of them do as well because they'll make a fraction of the money in it for a January video. And you'll see a lot of really good YouTube content in December and November. It's like sweeps week on the TV because there's just so much money to be made from the YouTube AdSense and the advertising. And so it worked out great for us because we're like going gung ho. We're doing lots of new content, and a lot of the big channels that we're competing with, even if they're on different topics, but just big channels in general, aren't putting out a lot of content, particularly those first couple of weeks in January. And so we got some kind of unearned views. It was easier to attract a new audience in January. So if you're starting a new YouTube channel, I wouldn't start in January. I would start sooner because try to get through that learning curve, but do a big push. Plan to do lots of new content in January. And I think you'll be glad you did.
And then I know there are so many gurus out there when it comes to you learning YouTube. I know you mentioned TubeBuddy has some great educational stuff. Do you have a favorite YouTuber about YouTubing?
I wish I did. Talk about a crowded space. There are probably 500 YouTubers who are really good at teaching YouTube. And they're all good. Like, it's not like, oh, you have to listen to this one guy. He's the only guy. Like Dave Jackson's really good at teaching podcasting, but there are other podcasters who also teach podcasting who are also really good. I happen to like the School of Podcasting because I tend to agree with a lot of Dave's recommendations, but there are podcasting gurus out there who are still recommending the Yeti. God bless them. And they have an audience, right? But YouTube's kind of the same way where there's not just one person to follow. And what you'll find is as you start to watch YouTube videos on how to do YouTube, you will get more and more content recommended to you. I will say, look for Mr. Beast's videos on YouTube. He doesn't do any of it on his own channel, but he will often be a guest like on Colin and Samir and some other of the bigger content for content creator type channels. And Mr. Beast is the most intense student of YouTube as a platform and online video as a medium. He's devoted his every waking hour of his life to cracking this code. And so when he says something and somebody else is like, don't listen to Mr. Beast, don't listen to that guy. Listen to Mr. Beast. It's like, he may not be right on everything, but he's really put in the work. He is making hundreds of millions of dollars a month with his YouTube channel and has become one of the most famous humans on the planet. And is going to be, I'm predicting, a New York Times bestselling author next year because he's teaming up with James Patterson to write a book.
Oh, nice.
And the book marketer in me is like, oh my gosh, that is a home run for sure.
Well, so you would be the guy to ask then, brand new person wants to start a podcast. And I'm sure the answer is going to be it depends because it's a podcast question, but should they start audio only? Should they start video? Should they do both?
The medium is the message. And I think that's not actually the first question to ask. I think the first question to ask is, what is the format of my show? Because there's a lot of different show formats out there, and some show formats lend themselves better to one format or another. So our live news show works really well as a video first event because we have a really engaged comment section. And whether we're using Riverside or StreamYard, we can take questions from YouTube comments and put them up on screen, which allows our live audience to comment on the news. And because there's two of us doing it, whoever's not talking is kind of scrolling through the comments and throwing the comments up on screen. And it's just a really great visual experience. Okay, so that's kind of on one end of the spectrum. Now, let's say you're a pastor and you want to do a daily devotional show where you're going to read a couple chapters of the Bible, have some thoughts on it, and then a prayer. And the idea is that this is going to be a part of somebody's devotional rhythm. That absolutely needs to be an audio podcast. Nobody wants a video version of that. That in no way is enhanced by being video. In fact, people may be doing or experiencing your show with their Bible on their lap. And if they have to like be looking at your screen now, it's made it just a worse experience. So those are kind of the two edges. And there's a lot of room in the middle for shows that work in both formats. So the kind of classic interview show, I don't think is a very interesting YouTube show, right? Two faces, two people talking. But I have thousands of viewers on YouTube who disagree with me. And so I was like, and they prefer, because we have both, and the YouTube version interrupts them with ads. The podcast version does not, unless I have a pre-roll or a post-roll, which only hits at the beginning and the end. But they prefer to watch the YouTube version. And this is actually another thing I would mention. A big advantage of having a podcast over a YouTube show is dynamically inserted content. And Dave, you do this really good with your, like, where's Dave going to be next week segment. You can't do that on YouTube. It's this frozen thing. You can't dynamically insert content. For those of you listening in the future, you're like, yes, we can. But as of this recording, that's all in beta. We don't know if it's going to be released to mortals or what the rules are going to be. But like for authors, for my audience, dynamically inserted content is magic. So you're an author, you're talking about podcasting, let's say, and then you've got a book coming out on podcasting. And you've got 1,000 old episodes. If you can take some dynamic content and insert it at the beginning and end of all 1,000 of those old episodes, they're all getting some views, and suddenly you're sending everybody to your book launch. And book launches it's all about sales all at once, and it's really helpful. And then you have a new book, you swap out those ads, you feature the new book. That's really nice. That's a great advantage of podcasting over YouTube. So it's not all rainbows and butterflies in YouTube land. It's a lot of hard work. There are some downsides, and it is nice to have both because you can, do live video and put the comments up on screen and say, look here. But it's also nice to have just an audio podcast where you can edit out the ums and uhs without people's heads jumping all over the screen.
That's always fun. Awesome. Well, thank you, my friend. Thomas Umstadt Jr., novelmarketing.com. You can check out his podcast over there. He's got a bunch of resources. He's got a conference now. How cool was that? We didn't even talk. We'll have to have you come back sometime and talk about the joy that is having your own conference. I appreciate all the insights. I know I've learned a bunch of stuff that I was like, I appreciate all the info, man. Thanks for coming on.
Yeah, thanks for having me. Our featured patron is Jane Daly, author of Where is My Sister? When Brianna vanishes inside an elite self-help program that demands total obedience, her sister Morgan must unravel a dangerous web of secrets before it is too late. Will she be able to rescue her sister in time? Find out in this Christian psychological thriller, Where is My Sister? By Jane Daly. Jane, thank you so much for being a patron of the Novel Marketing Podcast. Thank you for your support that helps keep this show on the air. We could not do this without our patrons, and I really appreciate you supporting the show every month. You can find the blog version of this episode at authormedia.com/464. You can find the School of Podcasting at schoolofpodcasting.com. And I am Thomas Umstadt Jr. saying thank you for listening and live long and prosper.